Hello, everyone. Welcome to Monday Design Forum. And my name is Jose. I'm the organizer of this event. But behind me and also next to me, there is a huge team that always contribute to the Monday Design Forum. In this case, is Kirsty Mate, that she's going to be our host of today. So without waiting more time for this session, I'm going to leave it to Kirsty. In the meantime, I will be here in the background doing as like a policeman or technician, just be sure that everyone is mute and things like that. So like this one. Okay, well, Kirsty, thank you so much for hosting this session, and Rowan, thank you so much for coming for the presentation.
Thanks, Jose. And just to introduce myself for people who may not know who I am, my name is Kirsty Mate, and I'm the course coordinator for applied design at the University of Tasmania, or UTAS. So hello, everyone, and welcome. And before I start, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge that we're meeting and working on Aboriginal land, and I pay my respects to the Palawa people, the traditional owners of this land, its skies and waterways. I pay honour to elders, past, present and emerging. So today I am really pleased to be able to introduce one of our sessional staff members who is currently teaching with us. So we're really thrilled to have him as part of our team. Rowan is an award-winning creative director, a master brand strategist, a celebrated musician and sought-after consultant, known for his imaginative ability to strike a chord with audiences, create impact and spark unprecedented social change. And it's with this idea of social change that Rowan's going to talk to us today. So he's going to present a story about the power of ideas, iteration and conversation, and learn how a community engagement brand saved lives and changed the world. So Rowan, welcome, and we're really keen to hear what you have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's a real pleasure and honour to be with you for today's Monday Forum. I'm loving being a new member of the team at the design school. And so, yeah, it's I'm really excited to be able to share these three case studies with you. So I will just take over the screen and share my computer sound. All good. So now I'll just bring up ideate, iterate, conversate. Ideate, iterate, conversate. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you some observations around these three brands that I'll get into, illustrated here. But especially that third word, conversate. I know ideate is quite a big word in design these days. Iteration has always been part of what we do. And conversate, I will share with you from these case studies just how some of these ideas were actually birthed and came into being through the conversations around them. And I trust in my sharing that, give you some encouragement, some new inspiration to make sure not only do you sit at your desk and completely put the thinking into the ideas and the designs you're creating, but remember to go out and just have conversations with people, because as I will share with you, it's incredible what happens when you do. And I'm going to talk firstly about the Just Like That campaign, which was a road safety campaign for Tasmania that I wrote in 2000. And this campaign, a deceptively simple idea. Here you can just see some of the first iterations of the campaign out in the world. It was a very graphically simple campaign. Wreck your life just like that, dead just like that, hit a booze bus just like that. I particularly like the fact that one was able to have. I thought that was quite great that we could get hit a booze bus just like that into the public space. $110 just like that, lose your license just like that. These are all billboards, some photos there and a couple of the other art files that were all over Tasmania. And I'll just share with you a couple of the kickoff commercials that we made around Just Like That after winning this tender. Just before I do that, just a bit of background. So this was in 2000 when my agency was just getting going in Tasmania. We had a couple of great clients in the tourism sector and we were doing some great work. But this was our first opportunity to submit for a very significant tender. And we were shortlisted against the much larger, relatively speaking, than we were at the time in Hobart and established agencies. And we won this tender with this idea, which really was the arrival in Tasmania of our agency and really put us on the map, as I'll share some other work ongoingly. So after we won this tender, this was the first ad that went to air. It's a 15-second simple little graphic, as you'll see.
You might be distracted. You mightn't see the other vehicle. The road may be slippery. You could wreck your life, just like that.
And another example, the other side of some of the key messages that we were communicating in these first 15-second commercials.
You may still be under the limit. You might be going too fast. You mightn't see a sign. You could be dead, just like that.
And just one more, which was a very popular ad. We called it Jenny, and it became famous, as you'll see when I get into some of the results. But I'll just share one more ad here with you now.
Oh, thanks, Mum. No, I was up already, don't worry. Yeah, no, just a couple of us are going to go out for tea. Okay, I love you too, Mum.
Yeah, 7:30. Well, Claire's coming straight from work. I haven't heard from him. I hope he hasn't forgotten. Oh, Jonathan.
You may not be watching a road. It might be a simple distraction. You could wreck your life, just like that.
Okay, so I hope you also enjoyed some of the kind of the retro images in these ads from 2000, the old phones, the 4:3 format, which is quite hip again now. But we really did transform road safety issues and results in Tasmania. So we've seen some of the ideas here, and you've seen a little bit of the, if you like, the iterations in those executions. But I'm going to sort of step back in time in sharing this story with you. So let's firstly look at the situation prior to the Just Like That campaign. So in 2000, I'm just going to move some faces around here so I can read it. In 2000, in-depth attitudinal research and evaluation by a company called Open Mind from Melbourne, now Hall & Partners, that it included some of the past advertising has resulted in only limited involvement and engagement with the community. These previous campaigns exert no real leverage and do not identify cause or circumstances. They do not engender empathy. While Tasmanian drivers believe driving behaviour has deteriorated, they seem disinclined to act to reverse this trend. The perceived levels of personal risk and vulnerability remain low, despite the campaign executions to date. So you've got to remember that in Tasmania, we don't have the sort of budgets that perhaps, of course, the Victorias and the New South Wales had at the time for public education around road safety. But there were certainly some very concerted efforts put into the road safety campaigns before we came along and created the Just Like That campaign. And we'll talk a bit more in a minute about some of the things we saw. And again, just with the prior situation, 11 out of the past 14 fatalities had been people under the age of 30. There was about half as many females as males had died, and roughly 1/3 more males had been seriously injured in road accidents since 1995. So from the research that we had through Open Mind, the first main sample variation were young people, especially young men. And the second main group from the research and statistics were people in rural areas who saw themselves as being beyond the reach of the law. Now, we're not going to have a lot of wordy slides, but it's just great to set this up with you guys. So our strategy that we created from everything we absorbed through the brief and the research. We knew that we needed to get alongside the community's ingrained behaviour. We knew that we had to create a public education campaign, not just a traditional creative ad campaign, which had been the type of campaigns created previously. We observed that the previous road safety campaigns carried a message of intervention and authority. And importantly, it asked drivers, especially young people, who are inherent risk takers, to act unnaturally, which people just won't do. And this was from our tender before we created Just Like That. I mean, of course, we had the idea when we submitted, but from our tender submission, we said that driving has become a secondary thing. We assume that when we're driving, that nothing is going to go wrong. We want to shake this assumption loose and plant deeply a seed of doubt that can spread into every road user's daily life. That's what we said in our tender. Now, what I want to share with you is where the Just Like That idea came into being. Remember that word, conversate. So you can imagine, I've got a brand new little agency. There's, I think 3 or 4 of us by now in the creative team, and pretty much we were the whole team. And there we are in our sort of upstairs first office, and we've got this opportunity. We've been shortlisted for this tender, and we're working around the clock. We're working weekends. We're doing the long days. We're getting the pizzas. We're stopping for we used to crawl out a window and go and sit out on a roof next to our little office and have a chat out there and a glass of wine later in the night, and then come back in and work harder. You can imagine how excited we were and how focused we were and how caught up in all the ideas, and we're all sort of brainstorming ideas. This was for weeks. And just imagine, my mum's coming to visit. So I've moved from Melbourne to Hobart, been set up a little while. Mum's coming to visit, and my little kids are excited. Grandma's coming. You can imagine how I am about, mum coming to visit right when this tender's happening. Anyway, so my wife was very understanding. They could go and do these things, and knew that I was going to be focused on all of this. But I had made a commitment that I'd take mum for a drive on a Sunday afternoon. We'd go down the Huon Valley, and I'd really, just try and be focused and be with her for an afternoon. Look, mum's always been my biggest fan, like all our mums, if we're lucky. And so we're coming back into town, and we're at the end of the southern outlet, coming back into the edge of Hobart here. And mum's asked me, after we've been for our little drive and looked at, what we looked at and stopped where we stopped, and she's gone, "Oh, so tell me, what are you working on at the moment, love?" And so I'm telling her, and it's, it's young people, and it's rural people, and we can't sort of tell them what to do. That won't work and everything. But what we've really got to sort of just demonstrate and show them is that it can happen just like that. And I caught myself. And it was about 3 minutes from where we were at the end of the southern outlet to where I lived in West Hobart. And we went inside, and I went into my little office, and I got out a pen just like this one, and I started to write down, "Dead just like that, wreck your life just like that." Now, it wasn't that we hadn't been doing weeks of brainstorming and ideas and dismissing things and road testing things. It wasn't that we hadn't done all the work and immersed ourselves completely in the research and what we needed to do. But it was that conversation with my mum, when my biggest concern was I was going to be away for a couple of hours from thinking about this idea, is where the idea came from. And so that's just absolutely a great example of the importance of making sure you conversate your ideas as you're building them. Just Like That very quickly became public vernacular. It was extraordinarily popular, and here you can just see some images from Falls Festival, the merch that was very, very popular. People would ring the radio stations after ads asking where they could get a Just Like That t-shirt. It was that popular. That's David Foster, the great Tasmanian axe chopper there on the front of the Examiner up north. Simple Just Like That posters all over the street. It was embraced by the media and PR, and it made the front of the paper here, speed banned just like that, banned just like that. It was a fantastic springboard for subsequent campaigns. This campaign ran from 2000 to 2007. Just Like That, You Blew It was the drink drive campaign that we created a couple of years after the main Just Like That, and it ended up being just as popular. I'll just share the ad we made off this You Blew It campaign, then we'll look at some of the results.
You don't have to be a genius or even a smarty to know when you're young, you love to party. When you take another drink, you don't bother to think that you're on the brink of a drink drive stink. But you blew it, yeah, you blew it. Just like that, you blew it. You blew it, yeah, you blew it. You blew it. You think you're bulletproof when you're high as a roof. You're having too good a time, and now you've crossed the line. No girl wants to end up all alone on the shelf, but when it's time to go home, you'd rather trust yourself. But you blew it, yeah, you blew it. You blew it. You blew it, yeah, you blew it. Just like that, you blew it.
That ad, people would ring the radio stations asking where they could get a copy of the song, and we actually made it into a single, and that was a giveaway too at lots of youth events and things. I mentioned the rural target audience, and we created What's Your Plan, Just Like That, which worked hard. So the TAC is the Victorian road safety body, and before I came to Tasmania I was in advertising in Melbourne, and I was there when Grey Advertising first started doing the extraordinary TAC commercials, which were acknowledged globally, and they've been a pioneer and acknowledged globally in the road safety space for the TAC has. And that Jenny ad that I showed you worked so hard that it was used in other state jurisdictions, including by the TAC, which was a first. So just before I share some results and we move on to another story of iteration, mainly iteration in the next example, what was so great about Just Like That was that we wanted to educate the community that crashes can happen just like that. We loved that it was a double-edged message. Yes, you can come unstuck just like that, but also you can become a better driver just like that. It illustrated a problem and it offered a solution, and it was never authoritative, but always informative. Obviously a consistent look to the campaign that was clear and simply graphic. And most importantly, reaching youth and rural people was paramount. And we knew that Just Like That would become both a conscious and or subconscious alert trigger that could not be lost on even the most foolhardy of thrill-seeking young men. In fact, it plays right to the boundaries of young people's needs to take risks. So here's the results. The Just Like That campaign made a virtually instant impact in the first 3 months, jumping to non-prompted awareness in the high 90s. Non-prompted awareness means that when an independent research tracking group do a study of road safety every quarter, and they do some in-depth attitudinal research by phone polling and the things that they do, when they ask somebody, have you seen any advertising lately? And they answer, we've seen the Just Like That campaign, that's called unprompted. Prompted awareness is when, after they've said anything at all about unprompted, the interviewee might say, oh, do you remember any specific messages around road safety? Then if they said something, that's prompted. If they say something unprompted, it means that when they've said, have you seen the advertising? They say the Just Like That campaign. That was in the high 90s after 3 months. It's been widely recognised, embraced and used in other states. 75% of people said it changed the way they drove, especially in the rural areas. That was from all the above there was from the chairman of the Road Safety Task Force. Down below is from the government minister's Ford, I think. Can't see it just without our photos on my screen. But during the first term, the campaign contributed to the reduction of between 12 and 18% in serious road crashes, as well as the first fatality-free Christmas holiday period since records began. So since records were kept in Tasmania, there had never been a fatality-free Christmas and holiday period, and the Just Like That campaign created one. And went on over, as you see there, 2000 to 2006, 25% decrease in serious injuries on the roads. It was, I'll just move these you've got the picture, and the MAOB, which pays for the road safety campaign, increased its funding significantly because it was so successful. All right, one last slide on the Just Like That campaign. That in 2016 there was a terrible accident in central Hobart that had an amazing outpouring of grief and frustration and sorrow and sadness from the Hobart community. And it happened near to where this is a parking meter that's been covered up, and a shrine, a public kind of shrine was created with the flowers, etc. And somebody stuck this sign on it, one in 1 second, in one choice, in one act, just like that, one tragedy. So that's in 2016, which is 9 years after the campaign ended. And if anybody listening in was in Tasmania through those years, we all know that anywhere we saw Just Like That in a movie or anywhere, it meant road safety in Tasmania. So the power of a conversation. The next example of, so I'm just going to try and move these pictures if I can. I don't seem to be able to, I'll see how I go. I think I'll be right. Just where I've put the view of the frame of people. Vestal Water. A guy called Mark Sweet started Vestal Water. Mark was an engineer from South Africa who was in Tasmania working in the forestry industry. And he heard me speaking on radio, on the ABC radio, about the Just Like That road safety campaign. And he called the office the next day and he said, I've got to speak to you about my brand. So again, conversation. Mark's great idea was to, he with his brother, I think, had, as incredible engineers, had devised a way to purify water. And Mark was a selective logging expert, and he was passionate about sustainability. And so he was getting out of forestry in Tasmania in those days and looking for other ways to, I guess, make a living and what he could do in terms of sustainability. And he created this technique of purifying water from the lowest mile footprint source imaginable, which was your own tap. And he shared this with me, and he brought in the technology and we did a sample in the office, in our by now a second office on the 5th floor with old pipes in a building in town. And we compared the water from the tap, which we thought was great drinking water. Of course, it's in Hobart, it comes off the mountain, and with the Vestal water that Mark had, and it was unbelievable the difference. So absolutely wanted to help him with this brand. Vestal now, you might have seen it in your travels in Virgin Gate lounges. It's all over Australia and other places. Extraordinarily successful and a wonderful product and vision. Mark came to us and he had this idea of the Vestal Virgins, which were the maids in the temple that would fill the water in the temple, and these were the Vestal Virgins, and Mark's vision for this brand. And he had these reference images from the Opera Garnier in Paris there. And so, of course, I'm showing you the back room now of the iterations and how we got to the Vestal brand. So we dutifully started to look at the Vestal Virgins, and here we are playing with what happens when we take the statue back to simple form. There's a couple more designers in the shop by now after these years with the Road Safety Task Force and other clients that came along. So, we've got a few different people trying a few different things here. But I really want to just let you see the back end iteration that it took to come to the Vestal brand in terms of the importance of iterating your thinking. So here we're exploring the Vestal Virgins. We've latched onto this idea of the urn. There's some typography experimentation going on as well. Here we're playing with what happens with the letter E. I think the difference between the L's there is millimeters between the top one, the second one, and the bottom one. looking at it vertically. We looked at fine art, we looked at sculpture, we looked at architecture, we looked at togas, we looked at the Art Nouveau movement. One of our designers was taking a great sort of position on this flowing, graphically showing the flowing of the water and the urn, or the vessel. So more experimentation, more shapes, more experimentation, more shapes, more how to show water, how do we colour it, adding other natural elements, because we're talking about sustainability and water and flow. And these might seem quite far-fetched when you see where we got to, but this is the power of iteration, because we weren't where we were yet, and this is the developmental thinking. By now we've started to apply some of these raw ideas to these extraordinary displays that Vestal had in the early days in some of the cafes and bars around Launceston. It actually, Mark was in Launceston, so these were some of the early wonderful displays they had of the pure water in the cafes and restaurants. And so here we are just graphicking up some of these shapes and seeing what happens. You remember that one we tried? Here's this one that was a bit of a front runner by now. And we might be getting a bit serious about this particular design now, because we've started to sort of imagine it in terms of retailing. We're thinking this could be a pretty cool tattoo. We've had that experience with the Just Like That campaign at the Falls Festival, etc. And here it is on a tap in a bar. But you know what? We get through all of this, and we're thinking, and I'm looking and I'm going, you know what? This just isn't working. This just really is not working. And you know, Mark was right there with us on this process. We've put a lot. This is weeks and weeks of work, and it's just not working. So we go back to the drawing board, and we go simple, and we go graphic, and we're looking at shapes. You know, totally different approach. Here's another sort of iteration, virtuous water. So we hadn't even got to water with virtue yet, which I loved. I wrote that line, and I love that twist, because you can have water with lemon, you know, water with whatever, but water with virtue is such a better line than virtuous water, but we weren't even there yet by this stage. So I'm pulling in some of the big guns here from some freelance colleagues and dear friends of mine. John Boucher in Melbourne, one of the most talented designers I know and typographers I know. He's taken some of this thinking and done some iterations, further iterations. And then I've moved across to a guy called Ned Cullick. Now, Ned is an extraordinarily talented illustrator and graphic designer, and he actually designed the Western Bulldogs logo. So I've called on Ned, and I've explained where we've been. I've shared all this with Ned, and Ned's doing these iterations beyond what you've already seen. So things are starting to get a little more interesting again here. And then here it is. Here's the moment where we went from the water on the left there to Ned's done a bit of a sort of a rethink in the middle there. And here she is. Here's our Vestal logo. After all those iterations and all those things, all that thinking, how important it is to keep developing till you know when you're there. From my experience and my journey, you know when you're there. And if you're not there, there's only one thing to do, and that is to keep going, really. But we didn't stop just there, because there's going to be a problem around that little middle bit where you can see where the vase meets the arm meets the water drop. So we look at this. And we look at this, and it's still going to be a weak spot for a t-shirt or for an embroidery stitch. So then we go here, and now we've arrived. Vestal, water with virtue. So keep going. If you're not there, iterate, iterate, iterate. And from what we've already seen, conversate. There she was on revisit on the tap. And here's Vestal today, which is everywhere. And the third example I want to talk about today is for a community engagement brand and campaign we created after the road safety success, and had opportunities from the Just Like That campaign. And it had really given me personally a real focus on community engagement and public education. It was such satisfying and rewarding work. The thrill of having written a campaign which literally saved lives. Very exciting to be in this space. We were doing some work with the local smelter here in Hobart around their what was called the Derwent Estuary program and their commitment to cleaning up the river. And that had been noticed by head office in Melbourne, and some other opportunities came our way out of that. One of which was to work with what had become a new company out of a merger of mining houses and the smeltering side of this business, to a company called Nearstar, which some of you on the call would know that name well. And I got to go to Port Pirie in South Australia. That's 3 hours out of Adelaide, up in the Spencer Gulf, around this rebranding exercise. And so I was new to the town, or the city, as we proudly call Port Pirie. I was new to Port Pirie, and I was just taking a little bit of a look around. And I saw this banner in the street, and I read it, and I didn't know what it meant. And I went into a McDonald's, the McDonald's on the main street of Port Pirie, and the woman that served me my coffee, I said to her, remember, conversate? I said to her, can you tell me, I've just seen this banner out there in the street. What's that? And she said, oh, it's something to do with the lead mob. It's the smelters. That's what she said to me, but her body language said something completely different to me. So I went back to my afternoon meeting with the client at the smelter, and we were talking about the rebrand, the brand refresh for Nearstar Australia. And I said to her, this was in 2006, I believe. And I said to her, I said, look, what's that banner in the street? And she explained to me that Nearstar was taking on this, Nearstar as a company globally was taking on, in every region and every centre, the management had to take on, as part of this new entity, this new company, this new commitment, it had to take on the biggest, most audacious project it could imagine and make a difference. And so Nearstar Port Pirie had decided they were going to take on the issue of legacy lead. Now, Port Pirie and, well, Port Pirie exists because of the lead smelter. It's the world's largest lead smelter at Port Pirie. And it's the principal industry, and it's been going for 130, I think, 40 something years now. And it's a multi-generational employer. It's the biggest industry in the Upper Spencer Gulf region. So it's, you know, it's critically important, and it's a very proud city of multi-generational workers at the smelter. Now, when lead petrol became a top of mind and conscious thing back in the 70s and 80s, the South Australian government had taken on all kinds of very, very worthy initiatives in Port Pirie to remediate the lead issue in Port Pirie. There was lots of projects around that from the South Australian government's point of view for a couple of decades by now. But none of it had landed well with the community. It was seen as like a threat to their life. They were feeling that they were being accused of being dirty, of not knowing how to clean their houses properly, of not how to look after their children properly. And so Nearstar wanted to address this very significantly. So back to this banner in the street and my conversation with the woman at McDonald's. So what this banner is about says our goal, at least 95% of children 0 to 4 in the Port Pirie community with a blood lead level of less than that scientific mathematical calculation there means less than 10 micrograms per decilitre of blood lead by the end of 2010. That's what that banner's meaning. And I said to the client, I said, you've got the strategy in the street. And I shared with them what we had done around road safety. And they were very, very excited for us to have a look at what was possible for community engagement in Port Pirie. So I've pretty much just told you all this, so no more wordy slides, except that the issue of blood lead levels and lead in children's development is most critical at 0 to 4. That's the most critical time in a child's development for lead contamination. So this is why, according to the World Health Standard at the time, the goal was less than 10 micrograms per deciliter of blood in children, in young children, and pre-2005, after a lot of years of trying to address this situation, there was still a high number of kids with elevated blood lead levels. You can see there was a new approach urgently required, and the 10 by 10 program, which was named by Nearstar around this commitment, commenced in 2006. We met them in 2007, and we devised a 3-part strategy. By now, we'd become Green Team Australia. We were an agency totally committed to working with companies on their sustainability journey, and that led to global work and some amazing resources. And we had a colleague, Ian Fowler, who had come from New York to work with us in Australia. And Ian had previously been the head of public relations for BP globally. So Ian had been around these types of issues a lot. And he brought along this fantastic wisdom for this 3-pronged strategy, which was to change the conversation. And I'll get to the second ones in a minute. So step 1, change the conversation. And I'm going to go to wrap this up in the next 4 or 5 minutes. First of all, we just changed the banner in the street. So we made it clear what it was about, and we wrote the line, for the future we all want. So 10 by 10 for the future we all want, and we put the kids in the street. As part of changing the conversation, we ran some ads in the paper in Port Pirie, which is a principal source of knowledge and information. Tens of millions of dollars are being invested in Port Pirie. That's a healthy start, because they were. Nearstar were very, very committed to the Port Pirie smelter. It's to this day the lifeblood of the area, and they've done an incredible transformation of that site over the last several years. Pirie streets are paved with optimism. So here we are through the first stage of the campaign, just reframing what's going on in the commitment. So the second step was to explain the goal. So I'm going to show you another commercial here, and then I'm going to share with you a bit more about the conversation that led to this commercial.
So we've put an end to it this time. You said this hill looks far too steep, and it's been 10 days without you in my reach. But time has changed, nothing at all. You're still the only one that feels like home.
10 by 10 is a goal. The goal is to reduce the blood lead levels in Port Pirie's children aged 0 to 4 years by the end of 2010. Because what was acceptable in the past is no longer acceptable, and because our children's future is the community's future, is the smelter's future. 10 by 10. It's for the future we all want.
So that changed everything, that ad, and it's a Missy Higgins song. You might know that song. The 10 in the 10 by 10 campaign, and we put it on supermarket trolleys in Woolies here. And here are some of the examples of the 10 that we created everywhere, getting back to the graphics and the simple messaging. So 2 things about the conversation around this idea. We had For the Future We Always Want, which was written by copywriter Peter Barry, incredibly talented copywriter on our team. And I knew that we still needed a sort of a mnemonic, a language for this campaign for the city of Port Pirie. I used to say that, at best there was apathy, and at worst there was anger about the lead initiatives before this campaign. And I was going to Port Pirie, sitting on the Hobart tarmac with Ali Brennan, an account director with our agency then, and we were going over for another meeting to do this planning. And we're talking, and we're ordering. It was must have been if it was a morning flight, it was a coffee. It was an afternoon flight for me, it was a red wine. But I was ordering my traditional cheese and biscuits. And we're talking. We're sitting side by side, and we're talking about everything. And I said to Ali, I mean, we need this. It's almost like the number 10's everywhere. Like it's all over the place. I mean, it could be this cheese and biscuits. And I was just grabbing my cheese and biscuits and trying to. And that's where the 10 came from. Again, in conversation with Ali, having immersed ourselves in the need, and we've been doing all kinds of work across the agency on this. But it's in those moments when you're really looking and you're really giving it everything you've got to come to the idea. And I've just shared with you today 2 examples of where the big idea is something very, very small, and something very, very situational, and something very, very conversational. So that's why whatever I'm ever working on, I'm talking all the time. I'm using words, I'm using language, because they sound so simple now, these ideas, just like that, sounds so simple now. But you know what, even then, when it was a brand new fledgling little idea, we had to remember how to say it. We had to sort of remember, what was it again? Oh, yeah, wreck your life just like that. It takes practice. It takes practice, but these things have become the vernacular. So you understand why I'm so passionate about talking about your ideas with others and road testing it, because it's amazing what you hear if you've done all the thinking and the work. Oh, and Missy Higgins, we Googled back then songs with 10 in them. And there was this Missy Higgins song. I wrote her a letter. I explained the situation. I found out who her management was. She donated the song. That's the power, again, of conversation. When you ask people, it's amazing when you ask people for help, what you get. So look, I'm just going to go through all these 10s, show you the sort of things we did, because I want to get to questions. We put the number in the street. Food, breakfast, really important. You know, washing your hands. We could talk about that another time. Port Pirie is a footy and fishing town, we used to say. So we did a lot of work around. This was a squash court banner in Port Pirie. We're playing to 10. I'm not going to get time to go into the opportunity to participate so much, other than now everybody wants to be involved. Everybody wants to be part of it. We did all this work around how and who. I won't show you that. I want to get to questions. And how did it work? We did lots of education with the primary schools, the doctors. The health minister at the time says here, in a 5-year period, blood lead levels have improved significantly from 48.3 to 72% in the 3rd quarter of 2010. So it had gone up, 30-something% in a couple of years after all those initiatives. And the Director of Public Health said it's the best result for an awareness campaign they've ever seen. It was 82% in January 2011. We came up with all kinds of initiatives to keep pushing after this goal of the 10 by 10 ended. And if you want to look further at that, you can go to tlaphistory.com.au, where there's 20 years of engagement we've done there in Port Pirie. Okay, so that's those 3 examples of ideate, iterate, conversate. And now I'd love to know who's got questions. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much. That was amazing, Rowan. Thank you for sharing that. There haven't been any questions in the chat just yet, so I might kick things off. Or if someone wants to actually just say, rather than put it in the chat, just raise your hand by using the reactions button that you find in the Zoom there. But I will just start with a question, just on that last campaign of 10 by 10. I think that was a really interesting way of actually approaching that issue. And maybe the answer was actually in the part of the presentation. You didn't have time to go into detail, but I was just wondering how did the behavior change? Because I would have thought that the lead was in the responsibility of the company rather than the community. How did the community actually engage in that and to be able to change those lead levels?
Great question. And you're right, the company was totally committed to all kinds of improvements of a historic site behind the gate and all kinds of programs there. But in the community, the issue is that the city is built on like there wasn't a tree in Port Pirie before tents got set up to service this Broken Hill smelter, which turned into, so legacy lead is everywhere in the soil. So there's all kinds of issues in Port Pirie around being mindful on windy days to close your windows or to wash and dry your hands with young children before they eat. So there are some very count honourable, very, very simple steps: washing and drying your hands before you eat, leaving your pets outside, wiping down outside toys before playing with them. I know it sounds horrendous and we're all like horrified hearing these things, but when you live in Port Pirie and you love Port Pirie, it's a beautiful place. It's a gorgeous place. And so these very, very simple measures are the 10, there's 10 of them that there's a genuine 10 of them, that young families, especially with young children, learn to make their totally effortless daily practice. But they sure weren't doing that before, for all the best efforts of South Australia Health and everyone else, the other stakeholders before that. But what we were able to do was engage people with those simple practices, which was the direct result in what we saw in terms of the numbers skyrocketing in terms of kids meeting the health standards. One of those ads I didn't get time to show you, we did such a great job back then, all the stakeholders in getting it sorted with that cohort, that people kind of forgot about it. And then 10 years on, we've got a next generation of families that thought that it had all been dealt with because of all the advancements in the community and the smelter and everything. So we actually, one of the ads I didn't get to show you was I had the idea to go and revisit those kids from 10 years ago, and we had them be the campaign 10 years on, which was just delightful.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. Well, thanks for that. Thank you. Anyone else got any questions?
Yes, Matt.
Oh, okay.
Matt.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for the presentation. Fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for watching, Matt.
Yeah, no, like a really sharp, mate. I really appreciate the attention to detail. Just wondering, like, how do you best overcome hurdles in obtaining a tender? So throughout the tender process.
Look, great question. Tenders are they're the best thing ever when you win them, and they're soul destroying and heartbreaking when you lose them. So look, you know, if you set out as we were doing then to grow an agency, and in Tasmania especially, you've got to put your hat in the ring for the government tenders and things that come along. And then you get on a bit of a roll with them. We went through a period where we were winning absolutely everything, and they were the best of days. But look, they're tough. They're just tough. They're a lot of work. You've got to really put the work in to make them everything they need to be. But I won't say that losing them, you know, the best day in an agency or in a design studio is when you win a tender, and the worst day is when you lose one.
No worries.
Can I just add to that? Oh, sorry, I was just going to add to that because I've done tenders myself, and I think, Matt, one of the really important things is to really understand what the client is wanting. So the research, I think, is really important in a tender, that you're really understanding why they're putting out a tender, what they really are wanting from the tender, and that you're addressing those issues. So really clearly identifying and addressing those issues, I think is, and then putting something forward that they might not be expecting. And I think that's what Rowan did, was actually put something forward that they weren't really expecting.
Exactly.
So you're creating a difference then between the other submissions.
Yes, I practiced that till I nearly broke my finger, and I had a new suit especially and a gold tie, and I was there in front of the panel, and the moment I did that and they all sat up like that, I thought, couldn't have practiced it any better.
Yeah, well done. Okay, thanks so much.
Great to meet you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
You too. Thanks heaps, mate.
Any other questions from people or comments? It could be a comment, doesn't have to be a question. Nick, did you have...
I've got a question and a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. The comment was, I like, it's amazing, especially with campaigns and in advertising, that you don't, it's perception that counts for so much. And I was just even thinking of Vestal Virgins. I'm a bit of a mythology buff. And I know that Hebe, the sister of Venus, was the water carrier, and Vestal Virgins were the guys who tended the fire, you know, the temple and did prophecy. But it doesn't matter because virgin links with water, and who cares? So I thought, you know, like if you create a perception and you can sell it, it's brilliant. And I have a question for you. Have you come across any time where a particular brand has come to you for a campaign and they've either got, they haven't kind of followed their own core values, and you've had to set them straight in terms of, you know, they may be looking at a bottom line like extra money, and they're kind of wanting you to do something that you don't feel is good for the brand. Has that ever come across your way, that kind of tricky situation?
Yes, it has, Nick. That's great. That's a great question. So especially through the years of Green Team Australia, where we were totally focused on helping anyone that wanted to do the right thing by their sustainability need and their climate change need in the case of, you know, global industrial companies. And we won lots of work in that space. But even before that, with Kui Tasmania, my first agency, and well into the road safety and other successes, we very famously in the advertising landscape of Tasmania turned down the tote. They wanted us to do their campaign. It was going to be the most lucrative and financially rewarding campaign we would have had for gambling in Tasmania, and we said no. And it was quite a famous thing we did, and it actually won us more work than we lost off that, with a lot of other work that came our way off that stand. And then, look, in all honesty, we were approached to do a campaign. It's on our website. I'm very proud of it. In 2019 for Tassal, and we did a campaign because I believed in everything. And back to the green team bit, like, you have to be very, very, everybody is probably now mindful of the term greenwashing, and nothing would have set us back on our ass more than doing something that didn't have integrity and didn't have substance. And our radars are right up for that, and we've often had to either steer somebody or say no to your question, Nick. But in this instance, we did all the due diligence, and I believe that there was a real moment there in 2019 where Tassal were wanting to re-engage with Tasmania and wanting to really, you know, and that we saw this opportunity to, all I wanted to do at the time then with the Tassie's Tassal campaign, which was very successful for them, was invite people to stop and look again at what they were doing and what their commitments were and what their best practices were. And it worked a treat, and I'm proud of the campaign. I just think the problem is that for whatever reason, Tassal have gone back into their shell and are not engaging and not continuing to say it where they're getting it wrong and declare it where they're committed to getting it right and re-engaging. So I'll leave it there. But if they came back to me today, which they didn't, I'd have to say, no, it's not. You're not keeping your word on what you were saying you were going to keep going with in that journey. So that's where I'll leave that one.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem in the digital world. A lot of big companies have retreated for that very, you know,
yes,
too scared to even have transparency.
No, but it worked when they came out, and they did when they were.
It's a myth.
It was fantastic for them.
Yeah.
And it opened all doors for them that were starting to close, and they're still, you know.
You can do what Facebook does.
They're a massive company.
Facebook is changing the
you can
technology. What? Facebook is actually going back and rewriting their own history
Yeah.
So that they're a totally different company, and a few generations will believe what's been said.
Yeah.
In terms of how they became Facebook.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
But it's a huge disappointment to me that they've retreated from that courageous and bold transparency.
Because they did have a good public, very strong public presence and
Absolutely.
positive one
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah. And look, I eat salmon. I think it's fantastic that there's a salmon industry in Tasmania, but I just think that they need to also own what isn't right and working. Anyway, I've gone on to
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Rowan and Nick. Anyone else? I'm just sort of looking at the chat. Nothing's come up yet, but Hetor has posted a message to say thanks a lot. So she obviously had to leave, but she said thanks a lot. Something that I guess and maybe this might spur a couple of more questions, but I just really wanted to just focus back on your presentation. And I really love the conversation with your mum that got that just like that campaign going, because I just felt that yeah, exactly. It's amazing how you'd spent all of those days and you were concentrating and there was a real focus and all of that sort of thing. But as soon as you kind of stepped away and your mind kind of relaxed, you were in a different space completely, you were different people, that idea came. And it was through, it wasn't like something that just sort of popped into your head. It was still through a conversation that you were having with someone about the idea, but it was actually taking you away, from that concentrated thinking. And so often people talk about, ideas come to you on the toilet or in the shower or, those sorts of things. And the other comment is just in the Vestal Virgin is, that I really loved how so many of those iterations were still using a pencil and a bit of paper, and that was really
my favourite tools: a Pelican highlight pen and an A4 pad.
Yeah.
Best things. And Kirsty, I'm so thrilled that you reframed or came back to the conversations and those, because it's true. I it's the thing I try and remember the most as I go on in life. That moment, those conversations. You said about on the Lille River. For me, it's often either in the shower or in the car. There's many a case study on our of the thing in the car, but you've got to put yourself in the way of it. As I also spoke to, I do believe that you've got to really give it your 110% in your thinking and your iterations. But the magic comes when you least expect it, and as you highlighted, often when you're sitting here in this myopic space in your desk, it's often when you walk away and go to the park.
But that wouldn't happen if you hadn't put in that energy in the first place, though.
Correct.
Either.
Correct.
Like you need to have done that homework, as you say, to actually get to that point. It's not sort of sitting here kind of, when's the idea going to happen?
No, and it's certainly not, I'm going to think of it the next half hour,
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Sorry. Yeah,
No,
I often consider things like in terms of trying to get a sounding board for my ideas.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no, it's really been excellent, mate. Thank you so much again.
Pleasure.
Okay, well, we arrived to 1 p.m. already. I imagine that we can stay here till 2 p.m., but there are moments that we need to put a pause in our journey, and this is the moment. So we will continue. But before we end, I do a silly question to all the speakers, and it's, how do you feel on Mondays?
What was the question? Sorry, Jose?
How do you feel on Mondays?
Well, this particular day, I feel like it is already 2 a.m. because of the daylight. Okay. No, I actually love Mondays. I'm I'm grateful that I've been able to sort of, and in fact, I'm now down at the design thinking class on 9 to 11, which I find incredibly stimulating. So it's a great way to start the week.
Okay. Well, so thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Kirsty, for hosting the session, and Rowan for your amazing presentation. And I'm going to stop the recording right now. So